My pension statements used to give me peace, numbers that meant stability, security, a future I'd built one careful deposit at a time. Then one spring morning, my daughter came to my kitchen with coffee, perfume, and paperwork. She said, "Mom, your money's just sitting there. I can make it grow." I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my only child, smart, successful, confident. She called it a reinvestment. 3 weeks later, the bank called. My retirement account had been emptied, and the name on the new mortgage tied to those funds was hers. That was the day I learned my daughter hadn't reinvested my future. She'd bought herself one. My name is Nora Carver. I'm 68 years old, and this is my story. Before we continue, please tell me where you're watching from and subscribe to Her Legacy Tales, a place proving our best chapters can happen at any age. Now back to the beginning. After my husband Ed passed away 6 years ago, I thought I'd spend the rest of my days quietly, tending to my little garden, baking bread on Sundays, and taking walks down Maple Street where every porch still had wind chimes. Ed had been careful with money. We lived modestly. No luxury cars, no cruises, no debt. We had one checking account, one savings account, and a retirement fund that had been growing since the 1980s. After he died, I promised myself I wouldn't touch it unless I truly needed to. "You earned it," my husband had said once, holding my hand across the table at the diner we used to go to after church. "You worked all those years at the accounting office. You saved every penny. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for having a cushion." I thought of that the morning Diane came over. She poured herself coffee without asking, another old habit, and began spreading papers across the table. "Mom," she said brightly, "I met a consultant who helps clients reinvest safely. She's incredible. She helped me refinance my business loan, and she said people your age often get taken advantage of by lazy advisors. I told her about your situation, and she said we can do way better." I looked at her over the rim of my cup. "My situation?" She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I just mean your money's not working hard enough for you. I'd worked as a bookkeeper for 30 years, and though I'd been retired for nearly a decade, some habits never leave you. I still balanced my checkbook every Sunday night. I still tracked every interest statement. I knew exactly what I had and where it was. So when Diane said she wanted to help, my first instinct was to laugh. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "that money's fine where it is. I don't need much. The house is paid off, my expenses are low." "But inflation, Mom," she interrupted, tapping her manicured nail against one of the papers. "Everything's going up. Gas, groceries, utilities. You could be earning twice as much if you just let me handle it. I'll move it into something safe, something that grows." Her tone had that careful patience children use when they think their parents are falling behind the times. "Let you handle it?" I repeated. She nodded eagerly. "Yes, I'll take care of the transfers, set up the account under my management. We can even put both our names on it for convenience. It'll just make things easier down the line, for estate planning and all that." Estate planning. That phrase slid into my kitchen like a shadow. I remember watching her speak, her voice crisp, her smile practiced, and wondering when my daughter learned to sound like a banker. The thing about motherhood is that it doesn't fade with age. Even when they're grown, even when they're 44 with their own mortgage and business cards, part of you still sees them as that little girl in pigtails who begged you to watch her dance recitals. Diane had been that girl once, imaginative, driven, full of promise. But after her father died, something hardened in her. She called less, visited rarely, and every conversation somehow found its way back to money. "Mom, are you sure you're okay on your own? Mom, have you thought about selling the house? Mom, what are you even doing with all that savings?" Every question carried a hook. Still, that morning, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. She was my only child, and if she wanted to take an interest in my future, wasn't that what good daughters did? So I said, "All right, Diane, show me what you mean." That's how it began, with a folder, a signature, and trust. She spread the documents across the table. I recognized the names of the banks, legitimate ones, and the printouts of interest projections looked professional. There were colored charts, percentages, words like diversification and growth potential. "It's simple," she said. "We transfer the funds into a reinvestment account. It'll be under my name but linked to you. That way, we can move faster when opportunities come up." I frowned. "Under your name?" "Temporarily," she said quickly. "It's just a formality for the program I'm in. Once the returns start coming in, you'll see it all online. I'll even print you monthly reports if you want." I remember staring at her pen in my hand. It was my favorite. Black ink, gold tip, the one I used for crosswords. Something in me hesitated. Not because I didn't love her, but because I'd learned long ago that money changes people. It changes conversations. It changes tones. But then she reached across the table and touched my hand. "Mom, don't you trust me?" And just like that, my hesitation melted into guilt. Of course I trusted her. She was my daughter. The transfer happened that Monday. She brought her laptop, set it up on my dining table, and guided me through the login screens. I typed my password slowly, squinting at the small print, while she leaned over my shoulder. "There," she said softly, like a nurse soothing a patient. "See? Easy." Within 20 minutes, the funds I'd spent 40 years saving, nearly $320,000, were moved out of my retirement account into what she called a high-yield property reinvestment trust. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but she seemed so sure. "Don't worry," she said, closing the laptop. "You're going to thank me when you see the returns." Then she kissed my cheek, grabbed her purse, and left, the scent of her perfume lingering long after the door shut. I stood there for a long time, staring at the quiet house. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't fear exactly, and just a strange restlessness. I got up around 2 in the morning and made tea. The kitchen was dark except for the glow of the street lamp through the curtains. I sat at the table where I'd signed those papers and stared at the faint coffee rings on the wood. I thought of Ed again. His slow, steady way with numbers, the way he'd double-check every form. "Never sign what you don't understand," he used to say, "and never let someone rush you into it, not even family." I told myself Diane wouldn't hurt me. She might be impatient, ambitious, but she wasn't cruel, and yet something in my chest ached. A week later, she stopped answering my calls. When I finally reached her, she said, "Mom, everything's fine. These things just take time to process. Don't worry." I wanted to believe her, but mothers know. We feel the truth before it's spoken. By the end of that month, my pension deposit didn't show up in my checking account. The next, neither did my quarterly statement. When I called the bank, the woman on the line hesitated. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carver. Your retirement account isn't active under this name anymore. It shows as transferred." "To where?" I asked. She paused again. "It appears it was consolidated into a property investment under a secondary holder, a Ms. Diane Lowe." The room spun a little. "Property investment?" I repeated. "What property?" She cleared her throat. "Ma'am, I can't disclose full details without authorization, but it looks like a mortgage account." "A mortgage?" I whispered. "Yes, ma'am, under Ms. Lowe's name." I set the phone down slowly. Outside, the sun was just setting, and the last bit of light was catching the picture of Diane on my mantel, her graduation photo. She'd been 22 then, smiling, proud, holding her business degree high for the camera. I remembered that day so clearly. The way I'd clapped until my hands stung, the way she'd hugged me after and said, "I'm going to make you proud, Mom." And she had. For a long time she had. Until now. I sat down on the couch, folded my hands, and felt the weight of something breaking inside me. It wasn't just about the money. It was the realization that she hadn't seen it as mine, or even ours. She'd seen it as available. That night, I opened my old filing cabinet and pulled out every document I'd signed that day. My bookkeeping instincts took over. I studied each line, every clause, every unfamiliar abbreviation. That's when I saw it, a single phrase buried in the fine print. Transfer of custodial rights to property trust managed under primary beneficiary Diane Lowe. Custodial rights, primary beneficiary, property trust. The words formed a map, one that didn't lead to reinvestment, but to ownership. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this wasn't about helping me grow my retirement. This was about helping herself build one. The next morning, I called my late husband's old friend, Franklin Moore, a branch manager at a local bank. When he answered, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Franklin," I said quietly, "I think my daughter just bought herself a house with my life savings." He didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "Nora, I'm coming over. Don't sign anything else." And that was how it all began, not with a theft or a fight, but with a mother realizing the line between love and manipulation had already been crossed, quietly, under her own roof. Franklin arrived the next morning just after 9. He didn't call first. That was his way. Direct, old-fashioned, polite in the kind of way you don't see much anymore. I watched from the kitchen window as his old Buick rolled up the driveway, kicking a small cloud of dust in its wake. He still wore the same navy suit he'd worn when Ed and I used to visit him at the branch, though it fit him a little tighter now. When he stepped out of the car, he adjusted his tie, grabbed a leather folder, and waved. "Morning, Nora," he said when I opened the door. His eyes were kind, but there was a seriousness behind them I hadn't seen since the day of Ed's funeral. "You sounded worried on the phone." "I might have been tricked," I said simply. He nodded as if that sentence explained everything, and somehow it did. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place I'd signed the papers with Diane 2 weeks earlier. The sunlight hit the same spot on the wood, and the faint ring from my coffee cup still marked the edge. Franklin opened his folder and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "All right, start from the beginning. Tell me exactly what she said and what you signed." So I did. I told him about the Saturday morning visit, the charts, the reinvestment plan, and how the transfer happened through her laptop. I told him about the missing pension deposits and the bank call that ended with those words, "Property mortgage under Ms. Lowe's name." When I finished, Franklin sighed and leaned back in his chair. He rubbed his temple, then said, "Nora, I've known you a long time. You're not careless, but your daughter's a realtor. She knows how to make a document look harmless." "She said it was temporary," I murmured. "They always do," he replied softly. He pulled out his tablet connected to the bank system with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd spent 40 years navigating numbers and policies. His fingers moved fast for someone his age. "All right," he said, scanning the screen. "I can't access everything from here, but I can pull the public records. Let's start with her name." He typed Diane Lowe, County of Claremont, Oregon. The search spun for a few seconds, then loaded. "Here we go," Franklin said, scrolling. "She's listed as the owner of a residential property." He paused, reading the line. "Purchased 2 weeks ago. Market value $315,000. Mortgage type, funded through a private reinvestment trust." He looked up at me. I felt the air leave my lungs. That's my retirement total," I whispered. "I figured as much," he said quietly. "Franklin, are you sure?" He turned the tablet toward me. There it was in black and white, the county record showing owner Diane Lowe and under financing source, a name that made my stomach twist. Carver Family Reinvestment Trust. My name. Right there. I stared at it until the words blurred. She used my name to fund her mortgage. Franklin leaned forward. "She didn't just use your name. She used your money." I wanted to scream, to call her right then, demand answers. But what came out instead was a whisper. Why would she do this to me? Franklin didn't answer immediately. He studied me for a long moment, his expression gentle but measured. "You know, Nora, I've seen this more times than I care to admit. Parents trust their kids. Kids convince themselves they're helping, that it's not theft if it's family. I shook my head, tears starting to rise. But she said she'd reinvest it. She said it was still mine. She may have convinced herself that's true. But if that property's in her name and the account's been transferred, the law won't see it that way. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and began pacing. I raised her better than this, I said, voice trembling. After her father died, I made sure she had everything she needed. School, the down payment on her first condo, even that business loan she couldn't qualify for. I never said no, not once. Franklin didn't interrupt. He just let me talk, his pen still in his hand, his eyes following me with quiet sympathy. She told me she was struggling after the divorce, I continued, that her commissions had dropped, that she might lose her office lease. And I believed her. I told her she could stay here for a while if she needed to, but she laughed, said, "Mom, I'm not that desperate." I stopped pacing. Maybe she was. Franklin closed his notebook. "I can help you file an inquiry. We'll trace where the transfer went. But before we go that road, you might want to talk to her. Give her a chance to explain." "Explain how she stole from me?" "Maybe she'll slip up," he said. "People who think they're clever often do." I spent the rest of that day rehearsing what I'd say to Diane. Every sentence felt wrong, too angry, too soft, too formal. What do you say to your own child when you realize she's the reason you can't sleep at night? By evening, I finally picked up the phone and dialed her number. She didn't answer. I tried again the next morning, straight to voicemail. On the third try, she finally picked up. Her tone was brisk, clipped, the voice she used when she was multitasking. "Hey, Mom, can I call you back? I'm with a client." "This won't take long," I said. "I just have one question. What property did you buy with my retirement money?" The silence on the other end was sharp enough to cut through the line. Then she laughed, short, nervous, forced. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about, Diane. The Carver Family Reinvestment Trust. It's listed on your mortgage record. I saw it myself." Her voice changed instantly. "You had no right to look into that. That's private." "Private?" I said, my voice rising. "You used my name, my funds. I used the money for both of us," she snapped. "You said you wanted your savings to grow. This house is an investment, Mom. The market's booming. I'll sell it in a few years and you'll get more back than you ever would have in that dusty old account." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. "So you bought yourself a house in your own name and called it my investment?" Her tone softened suddenly, as if she'd realized how she sounded. "Mom, I'm trying to build something for us. You'll live here one day, okay? When you're ready to downsize. I just wanted to get ahead." "Get ahead?" I whispered. "By stepping on me? Don't be dramatic." That word, dramatic, hit me like a slap. "I'm hanging up now," she said. "We'll talk later when you're calmer." And then she was gone. That night, I found myself standing in the hallway, staring at the framed family photos. There was one of Diane at 16, standing by her first car, her smile so wide you could see the gap she used to hate between her teeth. I remembered saving for months to help her buy that car. I'd given her everything I could: time, love, stability, trust. And now, she'd taken the one thing I had left. The next morning, Franklin called. "I've been digging," he said. "Found something odd. The trust account your daughter opened, it's not just funding her mortgage, it's paying. Property taxes and renovation fees, too, and there's no co-owner listed. So she used all of it. Every penny, Nora." I sank into the chair by the window, the one Ed had built himself. The wood creaked under my weight. "Can we reverse it?" I asked. "Maybe," Franklin said slowly, "but we'll need to prove intent, that she misled you into transferring the funds. Without written documentation, it'll be her word against yours." I looked at the neat stack of papers on my table, the ones with her pen marks and my trembling signature. "I signed those forms," I said. "She didn't forge anything." He was quiet for a moment. Then you'll have to show that you didn't understand what you were signing, that she manipulated you. I let out a shaky breath. You mean, make myself look incompetent? I mean, make her face what she did. That afternoon, I went through every document Diane had given me, marking each clause I didn't understand. It felt like unearthing fossils. Each line, each legal term, another bone in the skeleton of a lie. I noticed something strange. On the third page of one agreement, in the fine print, was a line that read, "All property acquired under the Carver Family Reinvestment Trust shall remain the sole asset of the trustee until dissolution." The trustee was Diane. I stared at that line until the words blurred. It wasn't just a reinvestment, it was a transfer of ownership disguised as one. That evening, I drove to her office. It was a small building downtown with glass windows and a brass plaque that read Diane Lowe Realty Group. Her car, the new white SUV she'd bought last year, was parked out front. I waited until I saw her inside, then walked in quietly. She was on the phone, laughing, twirling her pen, completely unaware that her mother was standing 10 feet away. When she finally noticed me, her smile froze. "Mom," she said, covering the receiver. "What are you doing here?" "I want my money back." Her face flushed. "You can't just barge in here. Then you can't just steal from your own mother." "Keep your voice down," she hissed, glancing toward the front desk where her assistant sat, pretending not to listen. "I'm done keeping things down, Diane. I saw the mortgage, the trust documents. You used every dollar I saved. You told me it was temporary. Was that a lie, too?" She stood, straightening her blazer like armor. "You're overreacting. You'll get your return when the house sells. You'll thank me later." "I don't want a return," I said. "I want my life back." Her eyes hardened. "You're making a scene." "No," I said quietly. "You made the scene the moment you decided my trust was something to leverage." She looked at me for a long moment, then picked up her phone again, her tone now icy. "If you're not leaving, I'll call security." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it all nearly split me in half. "Call whoever you want," I said, "but one day, Diane, you'll wish you'd just called your mother instead." When I walked out into the evening air, the street lights had flickered on. The town looked the same as it always had. Tidy lawns, hanging baskets, the smell of rain coming from the coast. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't just an old woman who'd been taken advantage of. I was a mother who finally understood the truth. My daughter's ambition had turned into hunger, and I was her first meal. The next morning, Franklin called again. "I talked to a friend in the records office," he said. "There's something else you should see. It's about that property she bought." "What about it?" "It's not just a house," he said. "It's a 3-unit rental, income property. The mortgage is in her name, but the tax documents list you as the original funder." I went still. "She didn't buy a home," he continued. "She bought a business, using your retirement as collateral." I gripped the edge of the table, the wood pressing against my palm. So she wasn't planning for us. She was building something for herself. Franklin's voice was low. "And if you don't act fast, she'll make sure your name disappears from those records, too." I looked at the window, at the sky turning gold with late afternoon light, and realized that the next step wasn't about confrontation. It was about proof, and I knew exactly where to start. I've always believed that when life takes something from you, it leaves a clue behind. It's just a matter of learning where to look. By the time Franklin left that morning, I already had a plan. Not out of anger, but necessity. Anger burns out too fast. Determination, though, that lasts. I pulled out an old spiral notebook from the drawer where I kept my recipes. The cover was torn, and the first few pages were filled with grocery lists from 2008, but it would do. On the top of a clean page, I wrote, "Reinvestment Investigation." Below it, I made 3 columns: date, detail, proof. If Diane wanted to play businesswoman, I'd play accountant. The difference was I knew how to balance more than just books. I knew how to balance truth. My first call was to the county records office. I asked to speak with someone about property documents filed under the Carver Family Reinvestment Trust. The clerk, a woman named Sharon, said, "I can't give out personal information over the phone, ma'am, but if you come down in person, you can request copies of any public filings that include your name." "Do I need to bring anything?" I asked. "Just your ID," she said. Then, after a pause, "And maybe your patience. It's a long line on Fridays." That made me smile for the first time in days. The county office was in a low brick building, downtown next to a bakery that still smelled like my youth: yeast, sugar, cinnamon. I parked out front, straightened my sweater, and walked in with my notebook tucked under my arm like armor. Inside, the hum of printers filled the air, along with the low murmur of clerks talking to residents about everything from dog licenses to property maps. When it was my turn, Sharon, kind eyes, gray bun, and the patience of a saint, listened as I explained my situation. She nodded slowly. "Let me guess. Family member handling your finances?" My stomach twisted. "You've heard that one before." "More than I wish I had," she said. "Give me a minute." She disappeared into a back room and returned with a thin manila folder. She slid it across the counter toward me. "This is everything filed under your name and the Carver Family Reinvestment Trust," she said. "I can't give legal advice, but—" Her voice lowered slightly. "You might want to show these to a lawyer." Back home, I spread the documents across my dining table. There were 6 pages in total. Copies of deeds, transfer forms, notarizations. One of them caught my eye immediately. A deed of assignment, transferring financial authority from primary beneficiary, Nora Carver, to acting trustee, Diane Lowe. The notary stamp looked official, but the date was off by 2 days. 2 days before I'd even signed the so-called reinvestment forms at my house. My pulse quickened. She hadn't just used my money. She'd prepared to take it before I'd even agreed. I called Franklin. He picked up on the first ring. "Find anything?" "She dated a document before I signed anything. That's forgery, isn't it?" "It could be," he said. "If she pre-signed or falsified the date to make it look like authorization, that's a legal problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that can cost her license," he said flatly. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Diane's face when I confronted her at her office. How she'd gone pale, then cold. It wasn't guilt I'd seen in her eyes. It was fear, and fear meant one thing. She knew what she'd done was wrong. The next day, I drove to the branch where Franklin worked. He'd arranged for me to meet a colleague, a soft-spoken woman named Karen Willis, who specialized in fraud investigation. Karen looked younger than she was, with a sharpness in her gaze that told me nothing slipped past her. She offered me coffee and motioned for me to sit. "Franklin filled me in," she said. "We're going to treat this as an internal review for now. That way, it doesn't raise alarms on your daughter's end until we're ready." "Can you trace the transfer?" I asked. "We can try," she said, tapping at her keyboard. "What we'll need is proof that you were misled. Emails, messages, anything that shows she presented it as a joint account or temporary arrangement." I hesitated. "Most of it was in person." She looked up. "Then the next best thing is timeline evidence, date discrepancies, document inconsistencies, communication gaps, anything showing she acted before or without your permission." I pulled out the manila folder from my purse and slid it across the desk. Her brows furrowed as she flipped through it. "This one here," she said, pointing at the predated deed. "That's your smoking gun." That phrase, smoking gun, made something inside me shift. For weeks I'd felt powerless. Now, for the first time, I had leverage. Karen smiled faintly. "I'll open a formal case file. Once we trace the transaction, we can involve the compliance department, and if necessary, law enforcement." Her tone was calm, clinical. But those words, law enforcement, echoed in my head long after I left the office. That night, Diane showed up at my house unannounced. The headlights swept across the living room as her SUV pulled into the driveway. I hadn't seen her in over a week. When she knocked, her voice was all sugar again. "Mom, you home?" I opened the door just enough to see her face. She looked tired, or maybe cornered. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside. "We've been doing nothing but talk." She came in, her heels clicking across the linoleum like a metronome. Her eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on the stack of papers on my table. "What's all this?" "Copies from the county records office," I said. "Would you like to explain why one of these forms has your name on it before I even signed anything?" She froze, just for a second. Then, like she'd rehearsed, she sighed. "Mom, you're reading it wrong. That's just how the paperwork works. Preliminary authorization. It's totally normal." "I worked in accounting for 30 years, Diane. I know how dates work." "Mom, you falsified a date on a deed," I said, my voice trembling now. "That's not normal. That's fraud." Her expression flickered between defiance and panic. "You don't understand how business works. And you don't understand what love means." Her jaw tightened. "If you report me, you'll ruin my career." I met her gaze. "You already ruined my trust." She stayed silent for a long time, then said quietly, "I didn't mean to hurt you." I wanted to believe her. God help me, part of me still did. But then she looked at the documents again and said, "If those get out, I could lose everything." That was when I realized what she really meant. Not, "I could lose you," but I could lose everything. After she left, Franklin called. "She came by?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. Let her think you're backing down," he said. "That'll make her sloppy." Sloppy? People under pressure make mistakes. Keep documenting. Every text, every visit, every change. And if she tries to contact you about money again, record it. I didn't like the sound of that. Recording my own daughter. But I agreed. 2 days later, she texted me. "Diane, Mom, I know we got heated, but you really should trust me. Once I sell the property, you'll be set. It's in both our interests to keep this quiet." I stared at that last line. Keep this quiet. Then I took a screenshot. Proof, I wrote next to it in my notebook. The following week, Franklin arranged another meeting at the bank. This time, Karen was there too. She'd printed a full transfer report, color-coded, time-stamped. "The funds moved from your retirement account into a trust managed by your daughter's brokerage," she explained. From there, the money was distributed into 3 accounts. One of them linked to a mortgage under her personal name. She pointed to the last line. This transfer here, $62,000, was tagged as interior renovation. "She's renovating with my money," I said, shaking my head. Karen looked sympathetic. "Legally, this is embezzlement disguised as fiduciary management. The fact that she's family complicates it, but the evidence is strong." "So what happens now?" "We prepare an affidavit," Franklin said. "You'll need to sign it so the compliance office can start an internal fraud inquiry." I looked down at the paper. It felt surreal, signing my name again, but this time to protect myself from the person I'd trusted most. That night, the phone rang. It was Diane. Her voice was frantic. "Mom, what did you do? Someone from the bank called me today. They said there's an investigation." I took a deep breath. "Then you already know why." "You're going to destroy me," she shouted. "You don't understand. This wasn't supposed to go this way. I was going to make it right." "By lying?" "I was trying to build something for both of us." There was a long silence. "Mom," she said finally, her voice breaking, "please don't do this." I closed my eyes. "I didn't do this, Diane. You did." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. For years, I'd imagined getting older as a soft fade. Slower mornings, crossword puzzles, gentle routines. I never imagined it would feel like this. Like a courtroom waiting for the verdict. But something had changed in me. The fear had burned away. What remained was resolve. She might have taken my money, but she wasn't going to take my dignity. The next morning, Franklin called again. His tone was low, careful. "The bank's compliance office has escalated the case," he said. "They found something new, and it's worse than we thought." "What is it?" "The mortgage on that property. It's not her only loan." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "She took out a secondary line of credit using your trust account as collateral. If she defaults, the bank will seize the remaining funds, which means your retirement is still at risk." I gripped the phone. So I could lose everything. "Not if we act fast," he said. "I know a lawyer who specializes in financial guardianship cases. She's tough, discreet, and she'll move quickly." "What's her name?" "Melinda Shaw," he said. "I'll call her now." And as I hung up, I felt the first real flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope exactly. Something quieter, steadier. The beginning of a fight. The first letter arrived on a Wednesday morning. I found it in the mailbox tucked between a grocery flyer and an envelope from the power company. White envelope, bold type, and a return address that made my stomach twist. Lowe and Associates Real Estate Group. Diane's company. Inside, the letter was short, cold, and printed on heavy cream paper. "Dear Mrs. Carver, this letter serves as formal notice of your voluntary participation in the Carver Family Reinvestment Trust, dated April 7th of this year. All funds were transferred with your full consent and legal authorization. Please direct any further inquiries to our legal counsel. Respectfully, Diane Lowe." The word, respectfully, might as well have been a knife. I took the letter straight to Franklin's office. He read it twice, jaw tight, before setting it down on the desk between us. "She's lawyering up," he said, "trying to establish a paper trail that makes this look mutual." "It wasn't mutual," I said quietly. "I know, but she's building her defense. Everything she sends you from now on is strategy." He opened his drawer, pulled out a manila folder, and slid it toward me. That's why I already called Melinda Shaw. Melinda arrived that afternoon. She was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with a calm confidence that didn't need to be loud. Her navy suit was crisp, her notebook tidy, and her handshake firm. "Franklin told me everything," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "but I'd like to hear it in your own words." I told her everything, from the morning Diane came with her charts to the moment I realized my retirement had become her mortgage. Melinda listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily. When I finished, she leaned back and exhaled through her nose. "All right," she said. "Here's the bad news first. You did sign those documents. That means legally she'll claim you consented. But the good news, and it's strong, is that there's proof of deceit. The predated deed, the unauthorized trust account, and the internal audit showing misuse of funds." She tapped her pen on the table. "We're filing for immediate injunction. That'll freeze the assets under the trust until we can get a court order to reverse it." "Freeze?" "It means she can't sell, transfer, or borrow against that property." I nodded slowly. "So she can't use my money to dig a deeper hole." Melinda smiled faintly. "Exactly." 2 days later, I got a call from Diane. Her voice was sharp this time, stripped of charm. "You've made a mistake, Mom." "I've made a lot of them," I said. "Loving you unconditionally was one." "Don't start," she snapped. "You had no right to involve a lawyer. That house is my business, not yours." "My business funded your business," I said. "That makes it mine." There was a pause. Then she said coldly, "You're destroying your own family." And before I could respond, she hung up. The next morning, the retaliation began. My bank card declined at the grocery store. When I checked my account online, my balance was nearly empty. The automated voice at the bank confirmed the worst. "Your accounts have been temporarily restricted pending verification of trustee authority. Trustee, that word again. I drove straight to the branch, clutching my purse like a life preserver. The young teller looked nervous as she pulled up my file. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carver. There's been a hold placed by the trustee of your financial accounts. A Ms. Diane Lowe. She claimed there's a dispute requiring verification." "She's the reason there's a dispute," I said, louder than I meant to. The teller's face reddened. "I understand, ma'am, but until we get clearance from our legal department—" I didn't let her finish. I turned and walked straight out the door, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Outside, I sat in my car and tried to breathe. My groceries were still in the cart beside me, and for the first time since Ed died, I felt something I hadn't in years. Helpless, not broken, not defeated, but cornered. When I got home, there was another letter. This one from the law office of Harrison Bloom, the firm Diane had hired. It said, "Our client, Ms. Diane Lowe, asserts her legal right as acting trustee of the Carver Family Reinvestment Trust. Any attempt to seize, freeze, or transfer said funds constitutes interference with trust operations and may result in civil action." Civil action. I set the letter down and laughed bitterly. "She's suing me," I said aloud to no one, and the sound of my own voice in the empty kitchen felt both ridiculous and tragic. I called Melinda immediately. "She's trying to intimidate you," Melinda said calmly. "Standard move. It's smoke, not fire. The injunction is already in process. They can't touch your funds until the hearing." "When's the hearing?" "Tuesday morning. Be ready. Bring every document you have. And be prepared to see her there." I felt my throat tighten. "You mean face her?" "Yes, you can do that, can't you?" I paused. "I raised her. I can face her." The courthouse was small. Beige walls, humming fluorescent lights, and the faint smell of floor wax. I'd sat in this building before, but always for mundane things. Renewing a license, paying taxes, jury duty once back in the 90s. This was different. Melinda met me at the door, her expression unreadable. "Stay calm," she said. "You don't need to speak unless the judge asks you to." Inside, Diane was already seated at the defendant's table. Her hair was perfect, her makeup understated, and her suit expensive. Too expensive for someone claiming she needed financial help. When she saw me, her expression flickered. A split-second crack between anger and shame, then hardened again. Beside her sat her attorney, a man with steel-gray hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't look at her," Melinda whispered. "Let the evidence talk." The proceedings moved fast. Melinda presented the documentation, the predated deed, the audit trail, the transfer logs. She explained clearly, calmly, how Diane had misrepresented the purpose of the transaction and used the funds for personal gain. The opposing lawyer countered with a rehearsed defense. "My client merely acted as trustee under mutual agreement. Mrs. Carver expressed full consent and has no legal claim to revoke the trust once executed." Melinda smiled slightly, then dropped the final document onto the table. Diane's text message. "It's in both our interests to keep this quiet." That one line changed the entire tone of the room. The judge leaned back, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at Diane. "Ms. Lowe, would you care to explain this?" Diane's mouth opened, then closed again. I just meant it was private family business." "Indeed," the judge said dryly, "and that's precisely the problem." The injunction was granted. Diane's access to the trust was suspended effective immediately. Outside the courtroom, she followed me into the hallway. "Are you happy now?" she hissed. "You humiliated me in front of a judge." "I didn't humiliate you," I said quietly. "You did that all on your own." Her hands shook. "You'll regret this. When I lose my license, when I lose everything, that'll be on you." I looked her in the eye. "Diane, what you lost was my trust. The rest was borrowed." For a moment, I thought she might cry, but instead she straightened her shoulders and said coldly, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer again." And I did. 3 days later, another envelope arrived. This one announcing Diane's formal counterclaim. She was accusing me of defamation and undue interference with professional operations. Melinda wasn't surprised. "It's desperation," she said. "She's trying to scare you into dropping the case." But fear wasn't something she could weaponize anymore, because I'd already lived through the worst part, discovering that my own daughter had turned my security into her stepping stone. The rest, as painful as it was just paperwork. Still, the nights grew heavier. I'd wake around 3 a.m., the house silent except for the wind outside. I'd stare at the ceiling and think of Ed. He'd always been the peacemaker, the one who believed that time softened even the hardest edges. But this wasn't about edges. It was about boundaries, ones I should have drawn years ago. Sometimes love makes us blind to the damage it causes, and sometimes love means finally saying enough. The next week, Franklin called again. "Melinda just looped me in," he said. "They traced a second property purchase under Diane's name, a vacant lot outside town. She used part of your trust to buy it. She's been flipping assets under the radar." I felt the anger rise in me like heat. She's still moving money? She can't anymore. Not legally. But before the injunction, she already shifted some funds. The records show at least one wire transfer overseas. "Overseas?" He sighed. "It might take months to recover." Months. I pressed a hand to my forehead. What happens if she refuses to cooperate? Melinda's voice came through on speaker. "Then we escalate to criminal fraud." That night, as I sat by the window watching the rain, I saw headlights pull into my driveway. Diane's SUV. I didn't move at first. Then I saw her get out. No umbrella, no coat, and stand there in the rain staring at my porch light. She didn't knock this time. Just stood there for what felt like a long minute, then turned and walked back to her car. As she drove away, I realized something important. Whatever game she thought she was winning, it wasn't victory that brought her here in the rain. It was guilt. And guilt meant she still had something left to lose. The next morning, Melinda called with a new development. "The judge has scheduled a full evidentiary hearing," she said. "We'll present the entire case. If we win, the court can not only restore your funds, but also order restitution. And if we lose?" Melinda paused. "Then she keeps the house. And the money." I took a deep breath. "Then we'd better not lose." The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. It was the same small room as before, same flickering light in the corner, same narrow benches. But this time, something felt different. This time, I wasn't walking in as a victim. I was walking in as a witness. Melinda had prepped me for days, going over every document, every phrase, every quiet manipulation that Diane had spun into her version of family business. We had the audit trails, the predated deed, the trust account statements, and a paper trail so thick it could crush a lie under its own weight. And still, the morning of the hearing, I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. Melinda noticed. "Don't worry," she said softly. "You're not the one on trial here." "I know," I said, "but it feels like I am." Diane arrived 5 minutes late. That wasn't unusual. She'd been late to everything her whole life. What was unusual was how she looked. Gone was the polished poise from the first hearing. Her face was pale, her eyes red, her hair slightly unkempt. For a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who'd cry when she couldn't find her favorite doll. But then she looked at me and the softness vanished. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered something. She nodded once, lips pressed tight. The bailiff called the case, and the judge, the same gray-haired man as before, looked up from the docket. "Carver versus Lowe," he said. "Both parties present?" "Yes, Your Honor," Melinda said, rising gracefully. "Yes," Diane's attorney echoed. "Very well," the judge said. "Let's proceed." Melinda started slowly, deliberately. She laid out the facts. The initial transfer, the predated deed, the internal audit showing the retirement funds diverted to personal real estate purchases. Then she walked the court through the documentation, each exhibit numbered and neatly organized. "Exhibit D," she said, handing a page to the clerk. A text message from Ms. Lowe to the plaintiff, reading, and I quote, "It's in both our interests to keep this quiet." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Lowe, did you send this?" Diane hesitated. "I don't recall." Melinda smiled slightly. "Would you like to review your own phone records, which confirm the message was sent from your number at 9:43 p.m. on April 20th? Diane swallowed. "Yes, I sent it." "And what did you mean by keep this quiet?" Her lawyer jumped in. "Your Honor, objection, relevance. This was a private family matter." The judge cut him off. "Overruled. Answer the question, Ms. Lowe." Diane's voice was barely above a whisper. "I just meant I didn't want things to get messy." Melinda nodded. "Messy? Like using your mother's life savings to purchase a property solely in your name?" "Objection!" her lawyer snapped. "Sustained," the judge said, though I could see the corners of his mouth twitching. Not amusement exactly, but the restrained frustration of a man who'd seen too many of these cases. Melinda continued. "Let's move on. Exhibit F, county property filings for 418 Meadowbrook Lane. The purchase was made entirely with funds transferred from the plaintiff's retirement account. Ms. Lowe, can you explain why your mother's money funded your mortgage?" "It was an investment," Diane blurted out. "I told her it was for both of us." Melinda's voice remained calm. "And yet, the deed lists you as sole owner, correct?" "Yes, but—" "And the trust documents designate you as sole trustee." "Yes." "And the lease agreements for the tenants list only your name?" "Yes," Diane said, her voice cracking, "because it was supposed to be temporary." "Temporary?" Melinda asked gently. "How long did you plan to keep it that way before informing your mother?" No answer. The silence that followed filled the room. When it was my turn to speak, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Melinda gave me a reassuring nod. "Mrs. Carver," the judge said, "you may testify." I stood and took the oath, my voice barely steady. "Tell us, in your own words," Melinda said, "how this began." I looked at Diane. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "She came over one morning," I said she wanted to help me reinvest. She brought charts and papers and told me it was temporary. She said we'd both benefit." I paused, swallowing hard. I believed her. She's my daughter. I signed where she told me to sign. "And when did you realize something was wrong?" "When the pension check stopped coming," I said quietly, "and when the bank told me my account had been transferred into a mortgage, her mortgage." "Did you ever give her permission to buy a home in her name with your funds?" "No," I said. "Never." Melinda took a step closer. "Mrs. Carver, can you tell the court how this has affected you?" I hesitated. Words didn't come easily for that question. Then I said, "It's not just money. It's trust. It's sleep. It's looking at the person you love most in the world and realizing she sees you as an opportunity, not a mother. I don't think there's a number that can measure that." My voice shook, but I kept going. "I worked for 40 years. I didn't have much, but I had enough. Enough to grow old without asking anyone for help. Now, even with the money frozen, I check the mail like it's a minefield. I don't know what's going to come next." When I finished, the room was quiet except for the hum of the air vent. Even the judge seemed to look at Diane differently. Her lawyer tried to regain control. He stood and began to question her again, gently steering her back to his narrative. "Ms. Lowe, would you say your intention was to harm your mother?" "No," Diane said, wiping at her eyes. "I was trying to help. I thought I could double her savings. I wanted to surprise her." "By putting your name on everything?" Melinda interjected. Her lawyer frowned. "Objection." "Withdrawn," Melinda said smoothly, but the damage was done. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Lowe, you are a licensed real estate professional, correct? Yes. So you are well aware of what fiduciary responsibility means? Yes. Then you also know that misusing another person's funds under false pretenses, especially when done for personal gain, constitutes financial misconduct, possibly fraud. Diane's face went white. Your Honor, her lawyer said quickly, I must object to that characterization. Noted, the judge said, then looked directly at Diane. Ms. Lowe, I strongly suggest you cooperate with your mother's counsel before this escalates further. We broke for lunch shortly after that. Outside the courthouse, the air was heavy with that early summer heat that makes the pavement shimmer. Diane followed me out onto the steps. Mom, she said, her voice breaking, please stop this, I can fix it. I turned to her. The only thing that needs fixing, Diane, is the part of you that thought this was okay. Tears welled in her eyes. I made a mistake. You made a choice, I said. A mistake is forgetting to call. A choice is transferring your mother's life savings into your own name. She looked down, then said softly, You'll never forgive me, will you? I'll always love you, I said, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what you did. She didn't respond. She just turned and walked away, her heels clicking across the marble until the sound faded into traffic. The afternoon session moved quickly. Melinda filed a motion for restitution. The bank's compliance officer confirmed every detail: the transfers, the misuse of funds, the unauthorized loan. Each piece of evidence landed like a weight on Diane's shoulders. By the time the judge spoke, even her lawyer's confidence had evaporated. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said, this court finds sufficient grounds to return full financial authority to the plaintiff, Mrs. Carver, and to freeze the defendant's access to all related accounts, pending full audit. The property at 418 Meadowbrook Lane is hereby ordered into temporary receivership. Restitution and damages will be determined at the final hearing. He paused. Additionally, I am referring this case to the State Licensing Board for review of Ms. Lowe's professional conduct. The gavel came down with a dull, final thud. It was over, or at least the part that mattered was. Afterward, Franklin met me outside. He smiled. Not broadly, just the quiet kind that means I told you you could do it. You did good, Nora, he said. Better than good. I looked back at the courthouse steps. Diane was still there, sitting alone, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline that wasn't connecting. I didn't want it to end like this, I said softly. I know, Franklin said, but sometimes justice doesn't look like victory. It looks like truth finally standing up. I nodded. It's just, I keep wondering if she ever really believed it was for me, too. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Maybe she did at first, but good intentions don't excuse bad actions, and now she's got to live with both. That night, I made myself tea and sat by the window. The house was silent except for the gentle tick of the kitchen clock. I looked around at the home Ed and I had built, the one I'd nearly lost. It wasn't big or modern or fancy, but it was honest. Every brick, every bill, every dollar had been earned. And now I had something even stronger than savings. I had proof that truth still meant something, even in a world that tried to twist it. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. It's strange how quiet victory sounds. When I walked out of that courthouse for the last time, there were no cheers, no flashbulbs, no grand moments of triumph, just the steady hum of traffic, the rustle of the trees along Main Street, and the sound of my own breath. Steady, calm, certain. The judge's order came through the following week. Diane's license was suspended pending investigation. The property she'd bought with my retirement savings was sold under supervision, and the proceeds wired back into an account under my name alone. Every dollar I had earned, saved, and nearly lost was returned. But if I'm being honest, the numbers didn't comfort me as much as I thought they would. They couldn't. Because what I'd lost was something you can't trace or quantify: the unspoken trust between a mother and her child. For a few weeks, I didn't hear from Diane at all. Her lawyer handled everything: signatures, forms, final statements. Melinda called me once more to say, "It's done, Nora. You're in the clear." When she hung up, I stood there for a long while, the phone warm in my hand. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful at first. It was the kind of silence that makes you realize how loud betrayal can echo, even after it's over. But in time, that echo softened. One morning, I woke up before sunrise and stepped onto my porch. The air was cool, heavy with dew, and the sky was the faintest shade of silver. For the first time in months, I felt something simple and profound: stillness. I brewed coffee and watched the world wake up. Birds hopped along the fence. A neighbor's dog barked at nothing in particular, and the newspaper landed squarely at the end of my driveway. Normal things, beautiful things. I realized I hadn't noticed them in a long time. Later that week, Franklin stopped by with a stack of papers. "All official," he said, smiling. "The trust is dissolved. The money's back in your account, and I've got something else for you." He handed me a single envelope. Inside was a certificate of deposit, a new account, small but secure. In the corner, it read, "Community Scholarship Fund, the Carver Legacy." I looked up, startled. "I set it up in your name," he said. "Thought maybe you'd want to turn some of that pain into purpose. Help other women start again, women who don't have someone to fight for them." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you," I whispered. That's exactly what I needed." He smiled. "Figured you'd say that." A few days later, I got a letter, handwritten this time. The envelope was plain, no return address, but I knew the handwriting immediately. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I thought I could fix everything before it got out of hand, but I was wrong. I've lost everything, and maybe that's what I needed to understand what I did to you. I'm leaving town for a while. Maybe someday I can earn back a little of what I took. Not the money, but the part of you that used to believe in me. I love you, even if I don't deserve your love anymore. Diane." I sat at the kitchen table and read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the photo of her at 16. The one where she's laughing, sunburned, holding a soda can in one hand and waving with the other, the girl she used to be. Sometimes, when I think about her, I remember something my husband used to say when our daughter was small. "She'll learn, Nora. Maybe not from your lessons. Maybe from her own." He was right. Maybe this was her lesson. And maybe mine was understanding that love doesn't always mean rescuing someone. Sometimes it means letting them face the wreckage they built. The house feels different now. Lighter, somehow. I still walk past the garden each morning, still keep Ed's old jacket hanging by the door. But the weight I carried, the guilt, the shame, those things are gone. Last week, I attended the dedication ceremony for the scholarship Franklin helped create. 5 women from our town applied. One of them, a retired librarian named June, said she wanted to learn bookkeeping so she could manage her late husband's store herself. When she shook my hand, she said, "You give women like me hope." I smiled and told her the truth. I just learned the hard way that we can start over at any age. And sometimes, starting over begins the moment we stop apologizing for surviving. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat at the kitchen table again. The same table where Diane had laid out her charts, where I'd signed my name without knowing what it would cost me. But now, the papers in front of me were different. They were receipts for the scholarship fund, notes from Melinda, and a thank you card from June. Proof that something good could still grow from something broken. I picked up my pen and wrote in the margin of my notebook. The same one I'd used to track every lie, every clue. Final entry. I got my money back. But more importantly, I got myself back. I closed the book, exhaled, and smiled. They say ink remembers what hearts try to forget. Mine does. And maybe that's the point, because truth doesn't disappear when it's buried. It waits. And sometimes all it needs is one woman. Tired, betrayed, but still standing, willing to dig.